The Spectrum novel series by Samantha Mina follows an eclectic cast of teens fighting to find their place in the wars plaguing their dystopian world. Fantastic world building, combat sequences, geopolitics, exploration of a soldier's psyche, social commentary, the turmoil of a young adulthood, forbidden romance, and much more. Spectrum is the fast-paced, character-driven sci-fi fantasy adventure that you have been looking for.
Welcome to a very special episode that we wanted to have a very special guest and feature them. Mm-hmm. I am Cosmic Brownie.
I'm Lean Cuisine.
And this is our lovely guest, Samantha Mina. Hi there.
Hi.
So, guys, Samantha wrote a novel series, and she is in the process of releasing them, and we wanted to come and feature that and give a little interview. Mm-hmm. So today, that's what we're going to do.
Yep.
So, for starters, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Samantha. I'm the author of the Spectrum novel series. There are 6 books in the series. It is aimed at young adults, fantasy, dystopian, science fiction, kind of a fusion of all, genres. Mm-hmm. I've been writing the series since I myself was a teenager, so there's a lot of that really real, raw, teenage emotion kind of going into it.
Right. So it's a very passionate. It's definitely one of your passions for sure.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So writing is probably my favorite thing to do.
Really?
Favorite pastime. Yeah. Aside from,
I don't think I can do that.
So as with your pastime, what else do you do when you take breaks from writing?
Yeah. So I like hanging out with friends, watching and reading other science fiction. I used to try to keep up with everything my favorite author would write, but not as much time to do that anymore. But a lot of reading and...
Who's your favorite author?
Orson Scott Card.
Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game.
Yeah.
So past that, obviously being a writer takes a lot of time. I'm sure you're at the keyboard all the time. How do you find a way to balance between your personal life, your work, and your writing?
Mm-hmm. Well, my secret is that I am an insomniac.
Okay.
I'm only half kidding. So I guess this may sound super cliche, but really you do need to write when you feel like it, write when you feel inspired. So a lot of times it's, inconvenient, but I would wake up to write, or to jot down an idea. So as far as the balance goes, I don't know. I just
do it.
You just kind of do it. It reminds me of something that one of my professors in college once said. He said, if you consider yourself a serious writer, you would write every day. And everyone in the class was kind of, taken aback by that. Like, there's no way we could do that. And like, if you really love it, if it's a priority, you'll make time. And so you just kind of force it. You just make the time.
Yeah. We can understand that one for sure.
We do the same.
Is there any particular time of day or anything like that you set aside to write?
Or any sort of preferred setting?
Yeah.
Like a preferred area where you find yourself more creative?
Yes, definitely. So favorite time of day would probably be pretty late at night. Everyone else is asleep. You can kind of have that quiet, close your door, and just really dive in. And I just like to write at my desk,
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So with this particular novel series, Spectrum, what inspired you to write this book? So you're 16 years old, and you decide you're going to write a book. What made this the book?
Okay. I feel like there's a bunch of different things that kind of went into it, but I was really, really strongly inspired by my favorite author, Orson Scott Card. So prior to reading Ender's Game when I was 16, I had not touched any science fiction or fantasy before at all. I mostly just read, literary fiction or historical fiction. And then I just had a friend who loved it so much that she was like, I really want you to read this. And so I did. And then after that, I started, writing a lot of fan fiction for the Ender's Game series. I've always liked to write. So I would write, fan fiction for, Harry Potter, for like just all sorts of different things that I would read. I would probably sit down and write fan fiction for it. And then one day I came across an essay that Orson Scott Card wrote on his website, titled "When to Write Fan Fiction," and he said, "Well, honestly, if you consider yourself a real writer, if you want to go somewhere as a writer, you need to create your own material." And I was very convicted by that. And that week, I started writing Spectrum, which at the time had a different title. I titled it "Fire and Ice."
Okay,
a 16-year-old title for sure. Yes. So I think it was just a lot of things kind of went into it. I started, I liked Harry Potter, so there was that magical element. I really liked Ender's Game, so it has a science fiction component. I liked writing about fellow, teenagers, because I felt like that's, what I knew how to write about. And then also, this may sound strange, but I think Ender's Game kind of gave me this new interest or fascination in military things,
right?
Which I never had before. I don't have a military background with my family, nothing like that. It was really just an interest that grew out of reading science fiction novels.
Right.
So I guess a fusion of all those different things combined kind of, created a science fiction fantasy dystopian story.
Yeah, it's definitely a very eclectic world for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I know, right? I would assume writing at least one book would take many hours upon days of your time, and let alone writing 6 books. Do you think you can estimate how many hours or days that would take to make such a series?
Sure. So it was a pretty drawn out process. So I cranked out first drafts. I mean, I kind of didn't really, fetter myself or edit too much. So I would say I cranked out a draft of books 1 and 2 in about a month each.
Wow.
And then it took about a year to write the 3rd book, but it is the size of these 2 combined and with a much more complex plot, because I feel like the further you get into a series, the more you can expand the world and kind of go into different things. And then the 4th, 5th, and 6th, I'd say about 6 to 12 months each, just to crank out a draft that, not be the greatest thing ever, but, moderately readable.
You get the idea out there.
Get the idea out, yeah. And then over the next several years after that, it was a process of just rewriting and rewriting and rewriting each book. So I'd say that Spectrum has been rewritten over a dozen times.
That's impressive.
And the rest of the books in the series are there or getting there. I'd say, I don't even know what number I'm on for the 3rd book right now. I'm kind of doing a big rewrite that would probably be about the dozenth time. So I'd say I've been working on the series for over a decade.
Oh my gosh!
And it's definitely changed a lot through the years. But but I try to write every day.
Well, I mean, that takes a lot of dedication to be able to sit down and put your whole heart into a project for 10 years. That's insane. So with that being said, that dedication, you have to definitely fight through blocks. You have to fight through roadblocks. Did you ever find that there were times that you were having writer's block or having any kind of issues like that?
Kind of hate answering this question a little bit because it makes people hate me, but I've never had writer's block.
Oh, well.
Okay.
Which I can't really share that with other writers too often because they
we definitely suffer from writer's block.
Yeah.
But what I do, I can experience definitely huge hurdles with, oh my goodness, this is a contradiction. Oh, this idea is not working out. When I wrote this draft at, 17 years old, what was I thinking? So there would be a lot of just expunging, things, getting rid of a lot of material. So each book would probably be about 2 to 3 times the size they are now in their original form, just because, it
so many ideas.
so much just junk, in there that you just, as I was going through it over the years, I would just keep throwing things away. You can't get attached to what you write. You just have to be willing to hit the delete button all the time.
Yeah. We've been there.
So as you're keeping your ideas flowing when you're writing every day, do you have any sort of material or anything that would help you be more creative or just help you just keep writing? And do you have any sort of techniques or any items that you use, or maybe coffee would help?
Definitely. Caffeine is a good friend, especially when you're writing at night. So I'd say, I guess techniques. I think writing is a very, very emotional process. So you really have to write when you feel like it. I know that sounds kind of weird, but for example, I could be well, today I just really feel like a deep emotional dialogue. So I might not write chronologically. I'm going to skip ahead in my outline or in my draft to a scene that has the deep emotional dialogue and just really dive in, because that's what I'm in the mood for. And I feel like the quality of your work when it's an artwork, so when you're producing art, you do better when it's not feeling super forced.
That is true.
So maybe the next day I feel like I want an action scene, so I'll jump back and forth to where I'll find a battle scene and just dive into that. So my major tips would be don't necessarily go chronologically and write what you feel like writing.
Interesting. So, you mentioned Harry Potter. We got this fantasy, mystical world. And then we have Ender's Game on the other hand of your inspirations, totally opposite end of the spectrum. Did you find that it was difficult sometimes to merge those two worlds? I mean, it's got to be, you know, a challenge at least.
Sci-fi and fantasy aspects with each other.
I'd say that was definitely a challenge. I wanted to keep, you know, the fantasy. It's not high fantasy, you know,
right?
Like Lord of the Rings or anything so entrenched like that. It's not hard science fiction, you know, like Star Trek or Star Wars or anything like that. I think kind of making them meet in the middle, where it's taking place on a world that's not too different from our own, you know, but just the technology is a little greater in one country, and you know, there's in another country some people have these organic magical powers, and so I guess maybe kind of not having it as really, you know, deep entrenched science fiction or fantasy, and kind of having them meet in the middle in a very modern world that, you know, like the one we live in, is a good way to find a way to fuse the two genres.
Yeah, makes sense.
After you completed your first book, you know, you had the urge to write, and you got the book down. What made you want to make more and continue the series?
Actually, Spectrum was originally a standalone, and so when I started writing it, I didn't really necessarily know where the plot was going to go. I started with having the idea of one character. I just had all these sketches of the main character, Scarlet July, this, you know, 15-year-old girl who's kind of displaced and lonely. You know, I just kind of had this idea about her, and then I feel like the world building kind of sprung around her, and I, you know, brought in another character of Cease, who's like the opposite of her in every way, you know, and just kind of fleshed out the world. And so when I finished the first book, I thought, that's going to be the end. I just wrote one book. But over the next, you know, couple of weeks after finishing the first draft of the first book, I just kept, you know, thinking about the ending and feeling like there's just so much more that could happen after this.
When you decided to continue the book series, did you already have an idea of where you wanted to go with it?
I had an idea of where I wanted the second one to go only. And so I thought, you know, okay, so there was this phase of the war, now we're going to move on to the next stage, and I'll just write a book about that logical next step, you know. And but when I finished the second draft of book 2, I found that there, it originally had a, you know, a kind of a different ending where things were, you know, wrapped up a little differently, and I was like, okay, like I've concluded the story. But then I thought of ideas of, well, the reader's going to have questions about this. Well, maybe I shouldn't conclude this idea in that way. And the next thing I knew, there was a third book that I started making an outline for. And then as I was plowing through writing the first draft of book 3, I realized there was too much material for one book, and it seemed kind of disjointed, like it was 2 books. So I ended up, the original idea was standalone, then I thought there would be 2, and then I thought it would be a trilogy,
just kinda kept building.
and it just kept building until I found myself with 5 books in the main series and a prequel, so 6 books total. And the prequel would be meant to be read last.
Okay.
So, you know, there's a lot of very strong characters in this book. What character, if any, do you think you would most identify with, and why?
I don't know if anybody is really like me.
Yeah.
I tried to keep it a little distant from that so people wouldn't, you know, draw that connection or project. I would say that Scarlet, the main protagonist of the whole series, I would say that she has some funny word, Samantha-able qualities.
Okay.
Like she's, you know, a bit of an artist. She likes to, you know, to draw. She's, you know, very detail oriented and very, you know, passionate about what she does. You know, so I'd say there's a few aspects about her that, you know, I could relate to that I threw in there, but everyone mostly is really different for me. Yeah.
Well, with Scarlet, you're kind of. Do you find yourself? Well, you kind of said you find yourself more similar with Scarlet being creative. What sort of differences would you say you two would have?
Well, she's you know, has a temper. She's very kind of an angry person sometimes, which I feel like a lot of people in her situation, a lot of teenagers kind of going through major transition, people thrown in warfare, etc. You know, they would have a reason for all of that to really come out of them. So I'd say I tried to make her like a very flawed character that somebody would still want to root for, but her flaws, her glaring flaws, anger isn't, I wouldn't say, a big thing that I struggle with regularly, but I would say that's something that she definitely does. Some of the things I do relate is that she kind of has some, you know, she's really emotional and things like that, and I do consider myself maybe a more, you know, sensitive person. So, yeah, so there's like that blend.
So, Cess, am I saying that correct? Cease, okay. So Cease, he's a very strong character. A lot of times he's very emotionless. Did you base him off someone?
No.
No?
No.
Just another out of the blue?
Really, there aren't too many characters based off of real people. What I was going for with Cease would just be somebody who's very different to Scarlet. So the original title being Fire and Ice, or Fire versus Ice, it's the two countries they come from. One is a hot desert and the other is an iceland. But also I wanted that contrast of like the personalities. Like she's really fiery and passionate and emotional, and he's really, stoic and
very foil
so
type
in a way, you
relationship.
based these off of Scarlet to try and be the opposite.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So you said that you kept building your books as you went, like you started from a singular book and then 2 books and a trilogy. And you said you finished with a prequel. How did you feel once you decided that would be the end of it? Like you finally figured out the end of what's been happening. How did you feel?
Well, I was really glad with the way things wrapped up. I'm a big fan of more of like a bittersweet types of endings, because I think that it's more, when you're talking about a world of war, I think it's more realistic, and I don't think that it would be, something that I would, everyone rode off happily into the sunset. No, I want a lot of resolution, but, people are going to be coming out of war with scars, emotional scars, and kind of having that linger. And so I feel pretty strongly and confident about the way the series wraps up. The idea behind the prequel, the main war that's discussed in this in the main series it's the second war to take place between these two countries. And so the prequel kind of jumps back to the first war. So the first war is mentioned a lot. It's always mentioned about, Cease's ancestors being a part of it and things like that. And so that kind of fleshes out a little bit more about what happened, kind of gives the main series more backstory, honestly.
Okay. So you're working on book 6. You're on that very last page, and you hit the period on that first rough draft. What was the first thing you did afterwards?
I'm not gonna lie, I teared up.
I'm sure.
I felt, I was like, I can't believe this is how it all ends.
Right, yeah. Well,
there was an emotional reaction. Yeah.
Should we expect any more from this, possibly?
After the 6 books are all out? Possibly.
Okay.
So only recently did I start coming up with an idea for a potential spin-off, like a story in the world. So it wouldn't be like a direct sequel to the 6 books. It would be something that happens, hundreds of years later, just to kind of see, the world that, these protagonists built and kind of see the after effects of some of their work and things that happened years and years and years in the future, kind of what became of, their accomplishments and their work. And so it would be like a Spectrum story, but not, installment 7 or anything like that. So there's a possibility. I have a tiny outline going for that one. Yeah.
So should we expect any other projects to be looking out for from you? Anything outside of Spectrum?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. So aside from science fiction fantasy series here, I've also written a medical thriller that's loosely based off of my own medical past. So I'm a survivor of a very rare illness. And so most of the things that happened to the protagonist in that book happened to me. And reality is definitely stranger than fiction. So I think people will definitely be, kind of jarred by some of the things that happen in the world of modern medicine. So I have that medical thriller. I like writing about young people, and I was, in college when I got sick. So it's a story about like a girl in college who comes upon, starts developing like a really rare illness and how she kind of survives through it. So I have that, and then I have an idea for another science fiction book that would take place in this world, and I think that presents its own set of challenges, kind of having to do proper research, not just creating your own world.
Right.
My books take place on Second Earth, so I can just make up my own countries and cultures, and this would be bound to an actual society, but this would be years and years in the future. And so I have an idea for a science fiction book that would be called Asteroid Winter, where an asteroid hits the Earth and a lot more behind.
Chaos happens.
And they have to contend with that. Now the concept of asteroid warfare. And there's a lot of weird ideas that I kind of have cooking. So I have a bit of an outline for that one. I have an outline for a book called Andy Avian, Teenage Pilot. I like writing about teenagers. So just another story in our world about a boy who becomes a pilot and some of his mishaps. And then another book about a missionary family.
Okay.
It'll be based on a
Wonderful.
true story.
We'll have to look forward to that. So there are many young writers out there to be, potentially. Do you have any advice that you would like to give them?
Sure. Let's see. Don't be afraid of mistakes. So I'd say definitely a huge thing that I see happening with fellow friends who want to write. They'll say, "Oh my goodness, I just started writing. That first paragraph is horrible. Can't continue. This is terrible." It's like, that's okay. Keep going. Just get something out there. It is so much easier to edit 300 pages of junk than it is to, not have the book in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, no, just get it out there. Don't really edit in the beginning. Don't censor yourself. Don't just get these main, the story, the plot, the ideas out on a page, because once they're there for you to look at, there's something to work with, and you will be able to just rewrite it and edit and make it work.
Right.
So yeah, and then another, don't be afraid to just write when you feel like it. Write what you feel like writing. It could help to, obviously when I was a teenager, before smartphones and whatnot, so I would keep a little notepad in my pocket and jot down ideas. So right now you can just pull out your phone and take notes. So definitely, feel free to do that.
Would you recommend the try and write every day policy?
Yes, absolutely. Because once you start, you just get so captivated and so excited about it that it's hard to stop. But once you stop, it's hard to get back into it because life will just take over.
Right. Keep with the momentum.
Yeah. A routine is definitely very helpful.
So, incredibly enough, you are completely self-published.
Yes.
What advice would you give to someone out there who has already written a novel and they're trying to get into that kind of idea? They're trying to publish themselves out there.
Sure. I would say, most writers are going to be, the quiet, introverted types that like to sit at their computer and write quietly in their room by themselves. But unfortunately, you have to do a lot more than that if you want to be read. So my main advice would be you have to get out of your shell. You have to go talk to people about your books, try to get them out there, be a salesman, essentially. And so that's probably the hardest part for me, and I think would be, a big challenge for a lot of writers, because we're the quiet types.
So, have you when you started publishing your books yourself, have you received any sort of criticism? And if so, how did you deal with the criticism, from a fan base?
Okay. So let's see. So I've been doing a lot of, posts on Facebook and things like that, and I'd say that it's been in a lot of, going to different conventions and such, Barnes and Noble's book signings, things like that, to try to get it out there. And I'd say the hardest thing to deal with is just, sometimes there can just be lack of interest from people you would think they would be interested. When somebody at a convention says something like, negative to your face, it can be really hard, but you just have to just grit your teeth and stay strong.
Just take the punches and keep rolling.
Yeah, you realize that, there's people who are not going to like it, but there's also people who do, and you just kind of need to focus on that and encourage yourself. Some of the criticism can be very, helpful. So after you're finished, nursing the wound, listen to what they said, and then maybe see if there's something you can do about it.
Okay. Right. So we talked about, your negative experiences. Can you tell us your favorite fan story?
Oh, okay. Let's see. So there's a couple. So there was.
Feel free to tell as many as you'd like. We love these stories personally.
Yeah. Okay, sure. Well, I was at a convention in Pennsylvania last year, at the end of last year. One of my first ones. I think the second one I ever did. Sold a book to a father-daughter. He bought it for his daughter. And then I did the DC, a big convention in DC this past spring. And the father was there again because he is a vendor in his own booth, so he travels as well for conventions. And he was like, "Oh, it's you again." He's like, "Oh my goodness, my daughter has been complaining that she wants to continue the series and whining and saying, 'Where's the next one?'" And so he was like really happy to be able to get it for her. And I don't know, that's just, those are the moments that you write for.
Well, it just builds a sense of community around your your creation, and as an artist, that just feels amazing. So, with that being said, have you pulled any inspiration from your fans to change something in the books, or say,
maybe cater to what they would recommend, or not recommend, but just wish would happen?
Yeah.
Has any of those occurrences happened?
No, not so much. I think because I've had all 6 written,
Right.
and
Oh,
rewritten
okay.
and written for a while. There's not too much I feel like I can change at this point, because anything I change, like in the third book that I'm working on now, for example, would impact the remainder of the series pretty strongly.
Right.
But yeah.
Maybe potentially for the other works that you're working
Yeah,
on.
because
Yeah.
I have so many ideas for other novels that'll come after Spectrum. That would definitely be more of the opportunity. The most common feedback I get is that people enjoy the characterization, just kind of really bonding and getting to know and love the characters. That's what I strive for when I'm writing, is to the characterization to be the most, important part of the story, and for you to really attach to these really flawed but likable characters.
Right.
And so most of the positive feedback I get is in relation to who the people are.
Okay. Well, we really appreciate you, letting us come to speak with you.
Yeah, we appreciate you letting us interview you.
Yeah,
about your books.
of course. So for anybody who's out there, you can get Samantha's book on Amazon. Also, we're going to go ahead and put a link in the description to her Facebook page. So make sure you go over there and give her a like. And we really appreciate you guys. So as always, stay fresh.